Welcome to When Technology Goes Wrong with me, Paddy Dhanda. I have the privilege of heading up the product discovery and agile practices here at QA. In every episode, we explore failures, challenges, and opportunities in the tech world. Today, we're diving into a topic that's back in the spotlight: digital identity. Joining me is David Birch, a leading global authority on digital identity, fintech, and something that impacts all of us: the future of money. David is an author, advisor, and commentator whose work has shaped thinking across governments, financial institutes, and tech firms. His books include Identity is the New Money and The Currency Cold War. He's named one of the world's top 100 influencers in financial services and is a frequent speaker on identity, privacy, and digital transformation. David, it's such a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for the kind introduction. It's wonderful.
I'm so intrigued to find out how you got into this world, but I'm going to just summarize the episode and some of the key topics we're going to be talking about today. Recently, 40 MPs signed a letter calling for the introduction of digital identities in the UK, citing benefits like tackling illegal migration, streamlining public services, and boosting the economy. Former Prime Minister Tony Blair has also renewed his call for a national digital identity scheme alongside William Hague, who both previously published a report advocating for national identity infrastructure. It's clear that momentum is building, but this isn't the UK's first attempt. Back in the early 2000s, a similar scheme was introduced under Tony Blair and later scrapped, having failed to gain the public trust it needed. So today, I'm going to be talking to David about what went wrong last time, what's changed, and what would it take to get it right today. So before we jump into the meat of this particular episode, David, I'd love to know how you got into this world of money and becoming an expert.
That's very kind to be called an expert. Actually, I started my career in secure communications for military and civilian use. And it was just one of those odd things that around about the time of Big Bang in the city, financial institutions became interested in secure communications and how to send data out via satellites and how to encrypt data and that kind of thing. And so that's how I ended up in that sort of space. And then if you've spent a few years in payments, you begin to realize that a lot of the things that you see as problems and barriers and frictions in the payment space are actually not really payment problems at all. They're identity problems. And I wasn't the only person to think this, I'm sure, but I spent some time thinking about that, and I ended up writing a book about it, and that took me more into the identity space. And one thing leads to another, and so I've been looking at this for years now.
Oh, fantastic. And I used to work for a big global investment bank, so a lot of what you're talking about there definitely resonates. And I guess this term, digital identity, it's something that I have heard about, but I don't really know what it fully means. So could you explain a little bit more about the term itself?
I mean, to be honest, I think that basic question shows you where a lot of the debate is going wrong, and why we haven't managed to get to where we should on this so far. So a lot of people use digital identity as essentially quite a generic term. They just mean some form of ID that works online. Whereas to me, it's a much more specific thing. Digital identity is essentially the relationship between online and offline identity. And what's critical to understand is there are three building blocks to that, which are different and have different implications. So one is the identification itself. Is this digital identity, linked to you or to QA or to, whatever? The second thing is the authentication. Is the person using this actually the person it was linked to? And the third thing is the authorization, which is, okay, what are they allowed to do now they have this? And as a general problem statement, the problem that we have is not really identification, because almost all of the things that you're involved in on a day-to-day basis, who you are isn't relevant to any of these things. The problem that we have is authorization. Like for example, downstairs, when I signed in downstairs, they asked who I was. I mean, I actually signed in as Sergio Aguero, which shows you how the whole thing was a bit sort of theatrical. But
is that your football team? Is it Man City?
Well, he was my hero from I supported Man City since I was a kid. So, but I signed into everything as Sergio Aguero. It's a fundamental security measure, because for example, if someone says, "Oh, you bought this thing in America or something," and then I dispute the transaction, and if it comes back signed Dave Birch, I know it's a fraud because I would never have signed it Dave Birch. So, anyway, that's a distraction. The point is that why were they asking me who I was? The actual question was, am I authorized to be here today? Not who. They're asking me who I am because that's the proxy to try to get to what they actually needed to know, which is, do I have an appointment here? Should I be here today? It's the authorization that's important. So in our sort of mental model of where we should be building digital identity infrastructure, we need to get away from this thing about proving who you are. That's how you see it in a lot of the sort of media commentary on it, proving who you are. And it's my right as an Englishman. It's in the Magna Carta. Why should I have to prove who I am to? Well, I agree. You shouldn't have to prove who you are to people. That's not the issue. The issue is what you are. Are you over 18? Are you an employee? Are you, do you have a ticket for this event on this day or whatever? So that's the sort of fundamental problem I think we have with so people's mental models of this, and in particular politicians and regulators' mental models of this, until relatively recently, I would say, were fixed in the past. So if you go back to sort of the Howard Review, it was 96, 97, I think, on the need for some sort of ID, people's only conception of ID at that point was their sort of wartime identity cards and being asked for your papers, every time you go down the street. And I'm against that too. None of us would want that. So I think the first thing to say is that you need to be specific about what we want from digital identity. And I know it's a bit long-winded, but you sort of get my point there. And then the second thing is why? Why now? And I think you've hit on something there with that. So the efficiency of, the economy as a whole. Every single day, a million times up and down the country, the stupid niggles and frictions that come from not having, it's not just about people having their wrong leg cut off in hospital and stuff like that. It's the fundamental, it's American Express calling me up and I'm not picking on American Express. It's just an example in my head from a couple of weeks ago. For reasons I don't really understand, wanting proof of my address, even though I've had an Amex card since 1982. I assume there's some government AML nonsense behind all of this, but and so I have to get a copy of and of course I don't have paper gas bills anymore like anybody else. So I end up sending a PDF of my gas bill to American Express. Now I can tell you a personal, I know anecdotes aren't meant to be data, but I personally spoke to the CEO of a bank, not in this country, who was expecting a grandchild. His wife wanted to open a savings account for the new baby. So they log in and he is denied a savings account at his own bank. But he's the CEO because he just moved house. And so the address that he gave was not the same as the address on the utility bill. So he was declined an account. So he took the PDF of the utility bill down to the IT department. They edited it for him so it had the right address in. And then he got the account at his own bank. And it's this sort of stuff that goes on or like me, I have to go to the office and I have to take in my passport to show my financial advisor. And I'm like, Keith, why am I showing you this? Well, it's the rules. So I take in and he takes a photocopy of my passport. What are you going to do with that? Nothing. Just put it in a drawer somewhere, and where it's like this stuff goes on all the time. And it's 2025 and it's time to stop this. We shouldn't be in a situation where, or I'll give you, I'll try to talk to the young people here. You should not be in the position where you can buy a counterfeit Oasis ticket. It should simply not be possible, because a ticket should be a cryptographically certified credential, an authorization to go to this event, this seat, this night, whatever. There should be no such thing as a counterfeit one. You know, I can make a photocopy of a ticket, of course, but I can't copy a digital signature. That's, you know, you saw that thing in the newspapers. I mean, everybody was laughing about this a few months ago. It's a bit unfortunate. Remember the sad the French lady who sent $800,000 to Brad Pitt because why Brad Pitt was on his uppers for some reason. I can't remember why exactly, but she sent $800,000. Well, I can make a pretty convincing deep fake video of Brad Pitt. You know, that's actually, this stuff goes on all the time now as it is. But I can't make a fake Brad Pitt digital signature. So it's time we shifted thinking to the point where it should be natural to use digital identity as the infrastructure for the things that make society work properly. And the argument that we shouldn't have an ID card and that we should carry on using, you know, I mean, basically botched, half-working, you know, gas bills and old driving licenses instead of having a proper infrastructure. That's not the same thing as saying we should have an ID card and chips in people's heads, which is what you say. Like if you go to somewhere, and like, this happened to me in Canada recently. I'm on stage. I'm talking about the benefits of digital identity, and some guy's like, "Oh, I suppose you want to put a chip in my head next." I'm like, you know, I mean, first of all, you're not worth chipping. Basically, is the response to that. But you know what I mean? Like it's time to have a rational discussion of this.
Yeah.
So, what's changed since last time? The technology's changed. We have new cryptographic techniques available to us that are now tried and tested, some of them coming from the crypto space, actually. But we now have, you know, zero knowledge proofs and cryptographic blinding and homomorphic encryption, all those other things. We can now have security at scale and privacy at scale. That's changed. I think an older generation is thinning, who associate identity with the war and Nazis, and, you know, if you say to them we should have some sort of ID card, then they see it as an expression of continental tyranny, the sort of thing people have in France, you know, and we'll never have that here and all that kind of thing. And then the sort of more modern discussion, which is basically you have a generation of younger people now who are like, why am I sending a PDF? Why can't I just log in using my, what in fact happened to Alicia, my co-worker recently when she'd just been buying a house. And she ended up having to send photocopies of her passport in the post, like it was, you know, like it was in the 60s or something. I mean, it's like, so you have a generation that wants things done in a more efficient way. Now, there are some issues with that because I don't think they take privacy as seriously as they probably should do. I don't think they think about it. I feel that we as an industry have a kind of ethical obligation to create a more private infrastructure that works properly for this sort of thing, but also responds to the legitimate, why can't I do this stuff online? Why can't I log in and do things? And I guess, you know, if you want to sort of say, why are we having this debate again now? You mentioned the letter. The report by Tony Blair, actually, and William Hague is a couple of years old now, although what they said in it actually made a lot of sense, you know. But you've got this letter, which I think, for people like me, actually, is, you know, that has a certain kind of, there's an ethical issue around that, because I kind of think, on the one hand, there are people, e.g. the mayor of Calais, who think that one of the reasons why migrants are flocking across the channel in small boats is because we don't have an ID card. And I'm sure in part that's true. I mean, I don't think if we had an ID card, it would actually make much difference because they're illegal anyway, you know, so. On the other hand, if it helps to advance the state of the art and push the government and regulators and so on into doing something, then I don't know, maybe that's a good thing. I'm not sure. So you've got things like that. You've also got, we've just had age verification turned on in the UK for certain categories of content. You now got, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but there's now a few million people in the UK that have been age verified online and now are used to it. So I was thinking this about Companies House actually the other day. I had a thing from Companies House which says, as from November, I think, you have to identify yourself properly. Up until now, you haven't had to do that, which is one of the reasons why Companies House is such a vector for fraud because anybody can create a company.
We've actually had a whole episode on that.
Oh, wow.
Very topic.
Well,
yeah,
you know how bad
incredible.
it is then.
Yeah.
So, but starting in November, you're going to have to ID yourself.
Right.
And so you've now got a few million people that have already had to ID themselves. And now Companies House comes along and says, we have to, well, now they're used to it. It's, oh, right, okay, I'll use that app. I'll use One ID. I'll do, whatever it is that's the easy thing to log into Companies House. So I think they use the government one login thing at the moment, but they should be using private sector things as well. So you've got all of these things, swirling around and changing at the same time. And I guess in other sections of the population, I mean, if you want to sort of think about it demographically, you've got younger people that want convenience, but need to be, for their own good, steered to a more privacy-enhancing infrastructure. And you've got older people who want essentially everyone else to have ID cards except them. And so, somehow we can sort of square that circle. So, yeah, technology has changed. I think the demographics have changed. People's views on this have changed. And this is all happening now, which makes the debate interesting again, which is why you can now ask the question, okay, people want something done about identity, but what? What should we do about identity? And I think it's exciting to be having that discussion again now.
Yeah, no, fascinating what you just sort of told us about there. And I've just come back from Disneyland over in Orlando. And
Cool.
I was just thinking about a couple of examples there where obviously whenever you check into a hotel as an international traveler, first thing they ask you is for your passport. And my wife's always really reluctant to give away the passport because she never knows what they're doing with it behind the little screen.
No, of course.
at the back.
And actually, I agree with I feel that all the time when you, if you go into office buildings in New York, they want scans of your driving license and things like this. And that sort of stuff does bother me. That's why I'm saying we should, we, the industry, should provide a more privacy enhancing infrastructure to people. And I don't see that that's, the passport example is an interesting example. You probably saw this thing a couple of weeks ago. I'd never heard of that website called T, the thing where women complain about men who are generally hopeless on things.
I've not come across that one. I'll have to check
No,
it out.
it's for so basically if you go on a date or something and you behave abominably, then you get reported on this website. So, and of course it gets hacked like all of these websites do. And the people who hack it have now got the passports and driving licenses of the women who signed up to moan about men, with the obvious, consequences that flow from that. Question, why was that website storing copies of passports? Because it needed to know that you were a real person and you're over 18. Well, there are lots of people who know that I'm a real person and I'm over 18, one of them being my bank, for example. So what you could have done is when I signed up for the website, you could have said to me, okay, go and log in via your bank. I go and log in via my bank. The bank sends back a cryptographic token, which says, yes, this person's over 18 and they're a customer. So now you know I'm a real person because I'm a customer. But there's no personally identifiable information in that whatsoever. Again, it's about authorization. It's about what I am, not who I am. So it's not as if we're bereft of any, oh my God, how could we ever do something about this? The technologies to do something about that are tried and tested, but they're not deployed yet. And that's, I think, where people like me have probably failed, to communicate how this should all work, I suppose. Yeah,
and I was thinking, as you mentioned there, this time round when they wrote the paper, Tony Blair wrote the recent paper, that it made a lot of sense. So I guess what has changed in terms of the dialogue that's coming from the government in terms of this time around versus the previous?
Well, I mean, the paper actually didn't say, in the newspapers it was, Tony Blair calls for an identity card. But that's not what the document said at all. What it said was, we need some form of identity infrastructure. And I think a potential way of framing this to move it forward will be to stop talking about some sort of national identity scheme, card, whatever, and talk instead about a national entitlement scheme. What we're trying to do is find ways to make it easy for people to demonstrate what they're entitled to. Whether it's, benefits or an Oasis ticket or being allowed into this building. I think it's shifting the debate in that direction is the way to do it. And I mean, I'm quite nostalgic about this, of course, because remember I was one of the people who contributed to the call for comment on the Blair ID scheme, and then I said I didn't think that was the right way forward, and we should be looking more at. In fact, I thought I'd come up with quite a good way of explaining it to people, because I said, maybe it's generational. I know, but I said, what we want is what Doctor Who has. So if you watch Doctor Who has a thing called psychic paper. And when Doctor Who shows you the psychic paper, you see what you want to see, right? So if you're the bouncer at a club and you want to see that, he's invited to this party, he shows you the psychic paper and you see the invite to the party. He gets stopped by a policeman who wants to see his driving license. He shows him the psychic paper and the policeman sees the driving license. He needs to present a birth certificate for something. He shows the psychic paper and it shows the birth certificate. And I thought that's a good way of thinking about things, right? When the barman wants to know if you're over 18, you should show him something which shows him that and nothing else. Not when you show them a driving license and you're showing them your name and address and all this sort of stuff, but either this person's over 18 or they're not, and that's all he's entitled to ask for and all that will be shown. This is called selective disclosure. We want selective disclosure in these kind of systems. And I thought Doctor Who was a genius way of explaining this, but I guess not enough people in Parliament were Doctor Who fans to really respond to that. My all-time favourite episode of it, which proves that psychic paper has an NFC interface, is when he got on a bus and used his psychic paper as an Oyster card to ride the bus. So,
wow.
Anyway, I'm abandoning my Doctor Who aspirations. That didn't work. I need to find a new way of explaining it to people. But yes, I think this is the essence, Paddy, of where we should be thinking. It's not, how can we take an identity card like we used to have in the war and make it work online? It's not the thing. It's like, what do we need online? And then how can we make that work?
So it sounds like there's some ideas there, but on a practical level, they haven't quite figured out how it should work. Because I'm thinking about, everyday consumers. Does it mean I don't have to have a passport anymore? Do I still need a passport? Will I need to have my passport with me still? Or will this completely get rid of it?
Well, passports are going to be with us for a long time. But the point is, you shouldn't have to. I mean, I don't know the figures off the top of my head, but I'm sure if you phoned up the police, you could find out. God knows how many passports and driving licenses are stolen in London every single day because kids are made to bring their passports to get into pubs or clubs. Making people carry around their passports when they're off their heads is a guaranteed way of ensuring the maximum number of those passports end up in the hands of criminals. This is clearly insane.
Yeah.
Use a passport for what it's intended for, but not for what it's not intended for. Same goes for driving licenses as well. But that kind of thinking, I think, is where we should, I'll use just as a silly made-up example. But suppose there was a, like your Apple Wallet or something like that. You can already put tickets into your Apple Wallet, or your Google Wallet, whatever. But suppose that was the only way to do it. So if someone said to you on Facebook Marketplace, "Oh, I've got 2 Oasis tickets for sale," right? You could ask for cryptographic proof that they have those tickets. The wallet would send the sort of proof. That's, I think, how we begin to edge this stuff into the mainstream. Maybe people like me were sort of starting from the wrong place, thinking about, how can we make the NHS more efficient and whatever. Maybe.
And David, I know a fair few other countries have been trying this out, and they're sort of doing this. Estonia was one that I came across. But what is the rest of the world doing about this? And are there any lessons we can learn from them?
I think there are sort of broadly 2 categories of lessons that we should be learning at the moment. So if you look at countries like India, China, for example, they've had incredible success in rolling out an identity infrastructure on an enormous scale to people. But there are cultural issues. I mean, this isn't the kind of identity infrastructure that we would want. The idea that you give somebody an ID number and they use that number for every transaction. That's not really what we want. As I say, I think we want a more privacy-preserving, privacy-enhancing infrastructure. So I think we can learn from the use of the technology and so on, but I think there are cultural reasons why we wouldn't want similar kind of systems. I think the places I find most interesting at the moment actually are places like Australia, New Zealand, Canada. I guess those are Anglosphere places where they've started to look at this more framework-based approach, which is where the UK is going as well at the moment, where the government creates a framework for all of this, but it's actually private companies that populate that framework and make it all work. And I think this kind of idea where you have a much richer infrastructure, you have more providers, to me seems more appealing. I quite like the idea that in the same way that you have 4 or 5 credit cards in your or 4 or 5 payment cards in your wallet, you would have like 4 or 5 identities. You know, if I'm doing something, you know, I'm talking to my financial advisor, or I'm trying to buy some shares, or, you know, whatever, my insurance company, then I should be using my bank ID or my financial services ID. But that's not the ID that I want to use for my Man City supporters group. It's not the ID that I want to use for my Dungeons & Dragons gaming association. The idea that my one ID is me in all circumstances and can be tracked and traced, and whatever, that's not quite right. I think we should allow people to have, you know, a handful of different identities that they use. I mean, that doesn't allow you to do bad things, of course, because if I present my, you know, let's say I've got my Manchester City Supporters Club identity and it's in the name of John Smith, and I do something horrible, and the police will go to Manchester City and say, well, where did you get this ID from? And they'll say, well, it was Barclays Bank. And then the police will say to Barclays Bank, well, who is person number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? And they'll say, well, it's Dave Birch. You know, so it's not that, but the point is, Manchester City can't find out it's Dave Birch by doing that. I mean, and that's a contrived example, but you see what I mean. So I think we can get to a situation where people can have a handful of identities that they use for different purposes that allow them to sort of partition themselves. I mean, online is a good example of this, because there might be many places online. I mean, let's use that kind of internet dating example again, where I might need to prove that I'm a real person. By the way, this is where a lot of those frauds start from, because it's not even a real person, never mind whether they're over 18 or whatever. But I prove that I'm a real person, but if I had to prove who I am, then I might be very reluctant to sign up, because it's none of your business who I really am. Like, until we've been on our first couple of dates and decided we like each other, you know. So there are circumstances where having to prove who you are actually would prevent transactions from happening completely. So I think looking at a kind of framework-based approach where people have a bunch of different identities they use for different purposes, cryptographically protected, I don't think we need to invent anything new to do that. We have the phones, we have the cars, we've got the contactless, you know what I mean? It's like, I think we should be more optimistic about where we're going next. If we can get that debate right reset slightly at the government level.
And I guess, David, you get to speak to lots of influencers or influential people in government and the wider sort of private sector. What's the sort of messaging that you're hearing? Do you think this is something that could potentially happen? Is it a realistic expectation?
Well, I mean, I don't get to talk to lots of people. I mean, tragically, I spend most of my time talking to banks, actually, which is... and, you know, that's a particular issue, because I've long thought that banks would be the obvious place to start working on this kind of thing. But trying to find the right framework for cooperation is difficult. You know, you want competition, but you want collaboration. And trying to make that work has proved more difficult. I genuinely would have thought that by now I would be able to use my bank ID to log in and do whatever I wanted. But we haven't got to that point yet. You know, when I go to create an account, as happened recently for car insurance, you know, I should be able to just press a button and have my bank tell them, yeah, it's Dave Birch, this is the address, this is and all that kind of thing. And I think there's no fundamental barrier to that happening. It's just things need to be kind of coordinated properly. And so in spite of all the evidence to the contrary, I'm still optimistic that eventually the banks will get their act together and take the lead role in this, because it's in their interest as well as everybody else's interest.
Yeah, I mean, I recently leased a new car and I had a terrible experience trying to prove who I was, because the form they got me to fill out had some issue with it. The only way they could legitimately sort of approve me was by sending them a physical copy, as you mentioned earlier. Like, you know, was it your daughter who they were expecting a photocopy of her passport to be sent? It's
odd, because that's not really security. That's what I would call security theatre. It's like people are actors in a play about security, but there's no actual security. I mean, anybody could send a copy of your passport. I mean, the people from the hotel in Disneyland, you know, could send a copy of your. I mean, how is that security? I don't, you know. So I think those, but it's those niggles that you're talking about like that.
Yeah.
If you multiply that up, that's billions of pounds worth of friction up and down the country, and we really should want to do something about that, you know.
And I guess we can't sort of have an episode without talking about AI at the moment. So how does AI change the game?
Well, that's actually the most important. That's the most interesting part of the work that I'm doing at the moment, actually, because it's the most transformational, the most disruptive technology. Of course it is. But how it will disrupt is an interesting question. I mean, I'm not the only person that thinks this, but you know, I'm on the side of the fence that says actually it doesn't really matter what banks do with AI, because it's actually what customers do with AI which will determine the next generation of financial services. You know, I mean, only people work in financial services think it's interesting. To normal people, they couldn't care less about any of this sort of stuff. It's just annoying, payments and whatever. I mean, I've got to do my car insurance. I mean, do you think I'm excited about renewing my car insurance? As soon as a bot can do that for me, I will willingly hand it over. I couldn't care less. But for that to work, you can draw that on a whiteboard and it all looks great. But for it to actually work, then the insurance company needs to know which AI is this. And the AI has to present the right credentials. Again, not what it is, not who it is, but what it is. Is it authorized on my behalf to do these things for me? Is it allowed to access, you know, certain things? And so while we haven't even finished sorting out how to get the identity of people organized, much less the identity of companies, as your Companies House discussion would no doubt have uncovered as well, we have an even bigger problem coming, because we haven't sorted out the identity of AIs. So when I'm talking about this kind of infrastructure that will support this transition from who you are to what you are, that has to extend to AIs as well as people. And right now, that's the most interesting part of the job right now. I wrote a paper a couple of years ago with Lloyds Bank on the advent of financial services that are pointed at bots rather than people. But I just published another paper this summer about it as well with Kirsty Rutter on strategies for non-human customers.
How would that work? I'm really intrigued to hear about that.
Well, it's interesting because suppose we did that. Suppose the infrastructure worked in that way. So I could give an AI authority to go and sort out my car insurance, whatever, access a bank. Well, let's take that simple example of a savings account for a grandchild. So obviously I'm a normal person. I can't be bothered to do any of this. So I say to a bot, can you go and sort out a savings account? Now, if you're a bank, I think that presents quite a problem, because my bot doesn't care about your lovely advert with the horse in the space station. That was a bank, wasn't it? I think. Was it in a space station or something? I can't even remember. But the point is, who watches TV anyway? So the point is, my bot doesn't care about your lovely advert. My bot doesn't care about your brand or your logo or your colours. Doesn't care that you sponsored the football or whatever. So what does it care about? If it's only price, then the financial services industry has a real problem. If it's only going to be on price, that doesn't look good. So there have to be some other things in there. Could be ethical frameworks, maybe. You know, maybe I'd choose the Greta Thunberg bot to sort out my car insurance. whereas you choose the Elon Musk bot to sort out your car insurance.
I wouldn't, by the way, but anyway.
No, but you know what I mean? Like maybe there's something like that that's bubbling around.
Yeah.
It might be technocratic. It may be my bot will just go for who has the fastest response times, who has the most uptime, as well as cost. But the thing is, we actually don't know, and that's why that's so interesting. So the extension of digital identity into the AI space for people like me is a real, I mean, that's, it, you know, there's a transformation coming in financial services, but it needs the identity infrastructure. And that's why that's such an interesting space right now. In fact, I'm at Money 2020 Las Vegas in later in the year, and I'm doing a couple of things about this there. It's a real hot topic at the moment. You're right to pick it up.
Yeah, and I remember when I worked for the big investment bank, you know, prior to my time at QA, and the sort of challenger banks were just up and coming, and they were fully digital, and we were really struggling because they were stealing a piece of the pie. And, you know, just the lean processes that they had, the fact that you could open up a bank account just by going onto their app, and you wouldn't have to send in any documentation. It was all done through, you know, some form of approval.
No, I remember I did a thing with I mean, I won't say the bank's not right, but I remember years ago when so I go online and, oh, this is great. I'll open this new account for, I can't remember what, free foreign exchange. I don't remember what it was. So I'll go and open this account. So I open the account online. So it's great. So I fill out all this stuff. So this is fantastic. Now, all you have to do is go to your nearest branch of, you know, whatever it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, with your passport and your gas bill and whatever. And it's like, well, I think you're kind of missing the point slightly.
Yeah.
About all of this. So no, you're absolutely right about all of that. But also remember, some of this nonsense is actually foisted on them by government. So some of the crazier stuff that goes on because of KYC, AML, CTF, PEP, whatever, you know, you actually have to sympathize with the banks about this, because they know a lot of this stuff is meaningless and pointless and whatever, but they're made to do it. And so you just got to grin and bear it.
Yeah, and I guess the point was that certain banks are further ahead than others when it comes to digital and really using the technology to streamline those kind of customer processes. So if we think forward, if something like this is implemented, this digital sort of identity, then do you see that those banks are better equipped to take that on board and be successful?
Actually, I mean, I can see both sides of the argument on this. So one side of the argument says, look, because of AI, this whole thing about apps and whatever, this is going to go away. This is just a fad, right? Because in 5 years' time, the idea that you'll go to an app to do something is ridiculous. This will never happen, because you'll just say to the phone or say to the computer, can you open a new savings account for the new grandchild? And that's it. You won't even look at the bank, or, you know, there'll be no interface that has their logo on it or whatever. And frankly, you probably won't care. So if the bot comes back and says, actually, I've got 3 good options here. Do you want the Bank of Nike, or the Bank of Manchester City, or the Bank of Elon Musk? Would I care any more than people care now where their Apple Card comes? I mean, do people who have an Apple Card, do they care whether it's Goldman Sachs or Citi? Or, I mean, I'm sure they don't. So if the Bank of Nike is actually, the funds are actually in a Barclays account, or would I really care? I mean, I can't think so. So actually that would favor the incumbents, because that favors scale. So you'd end up with a few big banks that are massive pipes, doing huge volume at low margins and providing these infrastructure services to everybody else. The other argument says, well, because of AI, it'll be much easier to actually set up a bank and do all this stuff. So actually you'll see a proliferation of specialists in this space. You'll see more and more. I always thought challengers was never a good name. I always thought niche banks was a better name for those kind of things. So you could see more and more of those, because it just becomes easier to do all that sort of stuff. So I can see both sides of that. I mean, on balance, I think if banking, you know, goes the way of other sort of standard business school industry case studies, then you'll end up with a real consolidation and a few big scale players which provide it for everybody else, you know.
And as a professional, a tech professional working in the field, is there anything that they can take away from what we've talked about today around what's changing in this space, and what should they be aware of?
I mean, I remember years ago, I mean, I know I sound like your drunk uncle at a birthday party about this, but years ago, there was a working group between, this is how long ago it was, because it was APAC's, but there was a working group between APAC, with the payments industry, and Tech UK, which was the tech industry. There was a working group on what was then called the Financial Services Passport. And I always thought that was a good idea. So if there's one thing I would say, it's like this idea of the banks having an ID which is used for financial services and cuts everybody's costs. And in return for that, the banks get a small interchange, for want of a better word. I think the idea of the Financial Services Passport should be resuscitated. I always thought that was a good idea. And for a lot of the things I do online that need real security, not, obviously. I mean, there are certain harms that would result from masquerading as me in the Dungeons and Dragons. But I mean, really, we're talking about insurance and mortgages and whatever. Well, a bank identity, a financial services passport of some kind, would minimize the cost for everybody in that space. So I think we should go and look at that again.
Yeah. And just to wrap up the episode, are there resources that you would recommend if someone is interested in knowing more about this and getting sort of deeper into this world of digital identity?
Well, my books, obviously.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Still available at all good bookshops.
Yeah.
And terrible ones as well, I hope. Look, I think if you go online right now, there are a few people that I think, certainly for me, I tend to follow people like Eve Marler, Jamie Smith on the customer futures sort of stuff. I tend to follow people like Doc Searles, makes me think deeply about some of the identity stuff. There's a lot of people out there who, talk about this sort of stuff, but there's really a few people that you'll see being requoted and retweeted by everybody else, and it doesn't take that long to figure out which half a dozen people that is to follow. So, no, I say get online. There are some good people online putting out some great stuff.
Oh, fantastic. And yeah, just to remind listeners, David's books are Identity is the New Money and The Currency Cold War. So yeah, please.
Actually, the most recent one, which was written with Victoria Richardson, is Money in the Metaverse, which is about the evolution of payments in particular. But it's, of course, all depends on identity as well.
Fantastic. There you go. There's 3 awesome books there, folks. So do check those out. David, it's been such a pleasure speaking to you about this topic. I had no idea about this whole world of digital identity, and you've certainly opened my eyes, and I'm sure a lot of the listeners are sort of finding lots of insights on this episode. So I just want to thank you today.
No, thanks for making it easy for me. It was fun.
Oh, you're welcome.